why don't we get started? Hello and welcome everyone to our Azure Transformation webinar series. This is episode 3, a cornucopia of Azure migration solutions. Today is November 16th, 2023. You know what that means. Thanksgiving is right around the corner. And I want to give thanks for all of you attending today. My name is Jeff Lizerbraum. I'm a pre-sales solutions architect here at Managed Solution, and today we're going to be covering Azure migration. What a concept. I mean, it's been around for a while, but it's a very effective method of lift and shift, move and improve, and things like that. And really, to speak about it a lot further, we're going to have a special guest today. We're going to have Spencer Duke, one of our Azure architects here at Managed Solution, giving us a lot of detail and a lot of answers to our commonly asked questions. Well, first off, let's set the table. And what I'll do is I'll give you a recap of our previous 2 webinars that we did in our Azure Transformation Series. Next up, Spencer's going to talk about Azure migration. He's going to carve the way through all of the options in order for you to get either from an on-premises environment or whatever environment you might be currently on into Azure virtual machines. Finally, I'm going to give you a demonstration of doing an Azure migration assessment and actually setting the stage for getting your inventory and your servers and data center up into Azure. Now, throughout this webinar, feel free to click on the Q&A button. If you have a question, we can answer it live. And certainly towards the end of the webinar, we can have you come online if you want to voice the question, and we can respond to it live. So let's go ahead and proceed. And the first thing is a poll. I would love to ask everyone here, have you or your organization used Microsoft Azure Migrate for any cloud migration projects in the past? The poll should be coming up right now, and we'll look for the answers to come in, and I'll share those with you. But really, as those answers are coming in, let's go ahead and recap some of the things we discussed in our previous webinars. Well, first off, we talked about infrastructure as a service, and Azure virtual machines are really that. They're an infrastructure as a service where Microsoft manages everything from the ground up in terms of networking, storage, servers, and virtualization. What you would be managing are really mainly what OS do you want to have on there? Do you want to have a Windows server, a Linux server? What type of middleware, runtime, or data will be involved in order to connect to your applications? So that is something you would really be managing, while Microsoft manages most of the lower layers of that OSI model, if you will. Now, commonly we run into these situations, and when you own your own data center, server room, racks, and things like that, oh, if you don't take care of it, it can get a little ugly here. And especially, we never really want to run into these issues where we might have to go in and plug in a cable behind a server only to find, where can I actually fit in here? Quite honestly, I've been in these situations, and it is not fun. So to really kind of counter that, we have our on-premises environment. Traditionally, we have our Active Directory services, maybe some databases, authentication servers, file shares, print services, and other management servers. And along with that, of course, is our network, firewall, switches, and so forth. But in Microsoft Azure, we can move this to something that Microsoft can manage. And really what this requires is for you to set up a storage account, a resource group, and the rest of the servers can have a path to migration there. Now, we also talked about where does Azure servers live? And the answer to that is that they live all over the globe. There's 200 physical data centers in various locations, 78 regions, 113 availability zones and growing. All of this leads for high uptime and resiliency. And you can tell, these are all linked by 175,000 miles of terrestrial and subsea fiber optic networks. Really, if you look at that length, we talked about it, how it was the end to end of Saturn's rings, if you will. So that is a large distance. Also, storage doesn't really seem to be a problem. We seem to have ample storage with 5 million petabytes and growing within Azure. So it's a solid infrastructure if you're looking to move and improve to this area. We also talked about the cloud adoption framework. So in terms of cloud adoption, we always want to look at defining what that strategy is. We want to plan for your digital estate and making sure that you've got the skills and adoption plan in place. We want to make sure you're ready. What is your landing zone and how are you going to expand that blueprint and how are you going to validate? And then also adopting to it. Sometimes there's change. Sometimes we need to figure out administratively and also for an end user experience to how to adopt, and afterwards we can start innovation there. Now, alongside of this, what is equally important is how to govern and manage these environments. Governing involves benchmarking, providing best practices, making sure that your governance is mature. And also in the management spectrum, this is where operational maturity comes in. And finally, we talked about Azure AI in our last episode, episode 2. We talked about all of the side dishes of computer vision, speech and language services, document intelligence, immersive reading, all of these things, anomaly detectors, it just goes on and on and on. And these are things that you could take advantage of when you move to Azure or even before you move to Azure. These are services that are available today. So hopefully this clarifies some of the things we covered in our last 2 episodes. And in this episode, I have invited Spencer Duke to really demystify some of the most commonly asked questions about Azure Migrate. So let's start carving our way through this. What I'm going to do is dial up Spencer now and we'll get started. Hey, I'd like to welcome everyone, Spencer Duke. He is our Azure expert with Managed Solution, and I'm really happy to have him here today. Spencer, why don't you go ahead and make a quick introduction for yourself?
Yeah, no worries. My name is Spencer Duke. I'm with the Managed Solution Professional Services team. I'm one of our Azure architects, and my main focus is data center migrations, Azure Virtual Desktop, disaster recovery, and yeah, that's where I spend most of my time.
Very cool. Well, as you know, the Thanksgiving season is coming up pretty soon, and I know that I'm probably going to add in a lot of puns here regarding that, so forgive me ahead of time. But I wanted to, first of all, talk about like the cornucopia, if you will, of Azure migration options. But first, before we go there, I mean, if I were your customer and I have servers on premises still, why should I even move my infrastructure to Azure in the first place?
Well, I can speak to, I guess, why customers come to us as opposed to why should you, and you can see if maybe some of these examples fit your case. More often than not, there's two main reasons. People, one, want to get out of the data center and hardware space, buying hardware renewals, maintenance and upkeep. That's a lot. For the most part, you can have a third party manage that infrastructure for you, but more often than not, you have an internal IT team that's responsible for that on a day-to-day basis, and that's a lot. That's a lot to manage. It's a lot to pay for, and a lot of people just don't want to put up with that anymore. And there's affordable alternatives like moving to Azure. So that's one. The other, in the last few years, have been remote work. With the pandemic and everything that happened, businesses used to be pretty, well, it depends on what industry, but they used to be pretty adverse to their employees working remote. It's pretty traditional that you wanted everybody in the office, 8 hours, 9 hours a day, whatever it might be. But that changed a lot with the pandemic, and all of a sudden businesses were trying to figure out how to enable their employees to do the same work, but from home or from wherever they could be. And access to the public cloud not only allowed, like virtual desktop configuration and innate decentralized way to access applications and get people to log in, things like that. But it also mean that you didn't have to worry about hardware and spinning things up. You could be very flexible and very fast in Azure. If you all of a sudden needed 200 more computers for 200 people that were all over the country, you could accomplish something like that with Azure Virtual Desktop. So yeah, remote work and getting out of the hardware business, really.
Yeah, it sounds like the responsibility model that I'm covering in this webinar, it shows that, you can shift it to Microsoft being able to be responsible for the hardware, for a large portion of it, the physical and virtual nature of it. But the customer is still going to have to be responsible for the application pieces that go on top of that, isn't that right?
Correct. Yeah, a lot of people, I shouldn't say a lot. Some people are under the impression that when you migrate infrastructure to the cloud, that all of a sudden Microsoft is managing everything about it. And in some cases that's true. If you look at like a SaaS based application or something like that, then the vendor for that application is 100% responsible for it. But
Right.
if we're talking about migrating a server that's hosting an application and another server that hosts the database for that application, and we put that in Azure, Microsoft at that point, they're really just handling the network connectivity and the hardware that infrastructure is running on. It would still be up to the customer or their managed services provider to um, be responsible for and maintain and upgrade, the server operating systems, the application versions, the database, backing up the servers. Um, so yeah,
All right,
it's
got
a
it.
split responsibility.
Yeah. Well, so now the next question is Azure Migrate. What is it? Is Azure Migrate actually a specific tool? Is it a group of tools? Maybe can you help me define what Azure Migrate actually is?
Yep. So Azure Migrate is you could call it a group of tools. It's or yeah, a tool with a subset of different pieces. You can assess and discover your existing environment, whether it's physical or virtual. Um, there's several different ways of implementing Azure Migrate depending on the variables that are specific to each customer. But the typically the first process is assessing and discovering the existing environment, and then also within the same under the same umbrella that is Azure Migrate. That there's the assessment and discovery piece of it, and then there's the migration piece of it. So using the same tool, but maybe a different appliance that you're going to spin up in your environment, you can
Hmm.
then replicate servers and actually perform the migration into Azure, do test failovers, do final committed failovers, designate network settings and performance settings for virtual machines and applications and databases. They can do all of those things.
Got it. And what is a good environment to use Azure Migrate? I mean, would it be like on-premises servers, virtual servers, or what type of environment would work best with Azure Migrate?
From a functionality standpoint, all of them are supported. Um, from an ease standpoint, it's much easier to use Hyper-V and or VMware. It's very quick and easy to spin up the virtual appliance that Azure Migrate requires. You point it to scan your virtual host, whether they're Hyper-V or VMware. and it'll discover all your VMs, and it's pretty seamless. You could probably spin that up in a few hours. Um, you can still do the physical infrastructure. It's a little bit more complicated. There's some agents that need to be installed. You need to find some other physical server to spin up um, spin up your migration appliance on, which if you're not in a virtualized environment might take a little bit of doing. Um, so definitely possible, works just as well. It's just a little bit more work to set up.
Got it. Got it. Cool. So a frequent question that I get is about, applications that are running on servers and dependencies when we're doing an Azure migration. Does Azure Migrate do anything in terms of helping identify dependencies and applications that say like maybe servers need to be migrated together? Will it actually have that type of intelligence?
Yes. Yeah. So yeah, what you're referring to there is called an application dependency mapping. This it's an additional agent that gets installed on the machines that you want to assess. So that being the case, say you're discovering an environment with 1,000 servers in it in your VMware environment. Um, you might not need to know much about, say, 900 of them. Say that it's accounted for, it's documented. Uh, you From a migration standpoint, you know what you need to know. But over the last year, there's 100 machines that have less documentation or something along those lines, and you want to know if they're talking to each other, if they're talking to other infrastructure in the environment, because obviously the whole point of this is if you move, say, 100 out of these 1,000 servers or something like that. Um, you introduce potential latency into the picture. Some other servers might need to be, for example, application server needs to talk to its database server. If you separate those two, there could be some issues there, or if they're not properly addressed from a networking standpoint or something like that. So what dependency mapping can do is show you from a network standpoint what server is talking to other servers on the network and kind of what routes it's taking and what ports it's using. And it's not necessarily going to tell you that, um, you know, Sage accounting software is on this server and Sage is talking to these other servers. But what it will break down is, the ports and the connectivity and the amount of traffic going to these other servers. And from there, you can kind of dive a little bit deeper into the application that's using those ports and that connectivity. And you can make a judgment yourself that, okay, I want to migrate all the servers that have to do with my application environment. That's 10 servers. I'm going to select all those 10 servers, and those are going to be migrated as a group together. So dependency mapping can help give you the data to enable you to make those decisions.
Got it. Awesome. Hey, another question, very frequently asked also. A lot of people are concerned about cost and how much potentially is this Azure migration going to cost me once I'm on virtual servers in Azure? How much is that monthly spend going to be? Is there a good way of determining that up front, or do I kind of have to wait until after the migration is done, only to find out, oh my gosh, here's what my spend is, and be surprised?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. We come across it a lot. The the short answer is no. You definitely don't have to wait until you move all your infrastructure into Azure to find out what it's going to cost. I should add to that a lot of people coming from a data center model, or they're managing their own hardware, um, a lot of the time have a very fixed fee. Whether we paid $100,000 for this hardware, so that's all we need to account for minus our electricity bill. Um, Azure is a consumption based model, so you're really never going to get fixed fee pricing. You can get close to that with things like reserved instances and reserved capacity for storage if you know what you're going to consume. Typically, we recommend making those reservation decisions at least after a couple months of being in Azure. I wouldn't make those decisions right out of the gate. So I'll start with that. But as far as estimating the cost before a migration, Microsoft has a few tools to help you with that. And typically for our projects that we engage in, we use them all at different stages. So typically we'll start with an Azure pricing calculator, which is a publicly available tool from a budgeting standpoint. You can put in your virtual machines, you can account for storage and firewall appliances and backup. You can plug all that into the calculator, and within each one of those resources, there's 100 different variables to choose from. So obviously, the more exact you can be with those variables, the more accurate your estimate is going to be. We do that all the time, and we walk customers through that all the time. So that's typically where we start. If from a budgeting standpoint and from a planning standpoint, a lot of things go into it. If all that is in line with what the customer's looking for, from there, from a technical assessment and a budgeting standpoint, we can go. We were talking about Azure Migrate earlier. We can use Azure Migrate to assess and discover what the customer has in their environment. And we can use that to generate cost estimations based off of actual usage. Azure Migrate will give us recommendations on if something is over provisioned or under provisioned. It'll give us a ton of data like that to help like narrow down our cost estimation and make it a little bit more precise.
Well, that's good to know. It's always good to plan ahead, and it's good to know that there's tools out there for estimating the costs up front. And thank you, by the way, for explaining that, this is more of an operational expense instead of a capital expense, although it sounds like you can get to certain capital expenditures to some degree, but it's mainly like a utility. So that's awesome. I've got another question, and I know this answer is going to really vary based on the number of servers, the size of the data, the size of the organization, other dependencies. But how long? And by the way, I know this is a loaded question. All right, how long does an Azure migration take?
I see. That is the question indeed. I appreciate that you prefaced it with with all those statements. That is my favorite answer to give as a professional services engineer is it depends.
Right.
If I could answer every question with that, that would be ideal. Well, I guess I'll start there. It does depend. With our projects, I'll break it down this way. We always start with an assessment and discovery phase. We then move to a pilot and planning stage. We put together, I should say, planning and pilot. Develop what we believe to be the appropriate plan from a technical standpoint, and then plan that out with the customer to see how that works from a practical standpoint, from the business's perspective. We come to a consensus on what we think the plan should be in terms of downtime and scheduling and things like that. And then we work to start building the infrastructure, typically kind of in the background of things. And then we have the actual implementation phase where we start cutting over resources. And obviously, as far as how long a migration takes, it's going to depend on if you're talking about 10 servers, if you're talking about 1,000 servers. They're very different. That typical project process is probably like a 3-month engagement on the shorter end, maybe 3 to 6 months. Again, so many variables that go into making that kind of decision. But if you're looking at that for context, if your environment's much smaller than that, you can decrease that time size. If your environment's much larger than that, you can increase that time size. And again, if we sometimes we get into the larger migrations, if we're talking, hundreds over hundreds, we're talking multi data centers that we're migrating, consolidating. But a year timeline, a year and a half timeline is not realistic for a customer due to whatever reason. Oftentimes we'll bring in multiple architects on a project like that, multiple engineers, and we'll treat it as several mini projects that are happening at the same time. Something like that requires a lot of coordination and cooperation from both our side and the customer side. But we have done it and it does work. So
Yeah, so like a lot of concurrent migrations can happen to help reduce that timeline, sounds like. Hmm.
yeah, don't quote me on the 3 to 6 months. That's
That's right. It depends. That is the term right there, definitely. Um, Now, one of the final questions I've got is, let's say I'm out in Azure, my servers are running on VMs in Azure and everything. What would be the best way to back them up? Are there built-in backup mechanisms within my Azure infrastructure, or do I have to add on any additional services? What does that look like?
Yep. So the answer is both. It's going to go back to it depends, right? But to the question of does Azure have a native backup solution? It absolutely does. It's just called Azure Backup, if you can believe it. Um, it's a good tool. It works very well for Azure VMs, Azure storage. It has lots of options from a security standpoint, soft delete, immutability. It's very seamless, easy to manage. The cost, it's a good price point as well. There's no additional licensing fee. You're just paying for storage, really. That's Azure Backup. I don't recall if it's still in preview or if it's officially GA, but one of the biggest limitations with Azure Backup was only one backup point per day, which for a lot of customers was not ideal.
Hmm.
So that very well might be out of preview now. If it is out of preview and it's generally available, that was a very recent thing where you could do multi-point um, per day backups, which that's achievable by most any other backup solution that customers are probably used to coming from an on-premise environment. At least hopefully they had some sort of backup solution. Um, so yeah, if it's just kind of a single environment and there's no specific requirements regarding like management and things like that, you could just use Azure Backup. Managed solution being an MSP and working with thousands of different clients and different environments, we try to streamline and simplify as much as possible all the tools that we use. We like to find, maybe a few tools, handful of tools that do the job really, really well and become experts in those. So we like to implement Veeam for Azure Backup,
Hmm.
mostly because um, we have customers that also use it on premise. Our team is trained with it. Their support is very good. It's affordable from a licensing standpoint. You can configure snapshots, every 15 minutes on your virtual machines. You can do Azure storage backup. Um, you can do the restores that you can do. It makes the file level restores much easier than Azure Backup. Um, it's a great tool. It's very easy to use. It works well for our team to manage. A lot of customers might already be familiar with Veeam, and if they have internal IT, it just makes the transition a lot easier. So we use them both. My personal preference, being an engineer, would be Veeam. But Azure Backup's a great tool as well.
That's great. Awesome. Well, as we wrap it up, so glad you are like totally setting the table for us. All right. You're helping us carve out all of the options of Azure Migrate and what they have and some of the things about how long it might take and also just to help us understand what are the backup mechanisms in place. So that's great. Um, once once I'm in Azure again, over time, are there any other considerations? I mean, is there anything else that I need to do to continually maintain or optimize? I mean, given that it's running in Microsoft, Microsoft runs and hosts the environment for the most part, but are there any things like over the course of time that I need to just consider in terms of optimizing, maintaining, upgrading, or anything like that?
Gotcha. Yeah, well, I mean, short answer is yes. I could list 1,000 things that I could say that you should focus on, but the first thing that I would say is make sure whatever we're doing in Azure or on premise is in line with the business's goal and what the business is trying to accomplish and how we best achieve that, and what issues the business is facing and how we solve those. But once you're in Azure, Azure has a ton of tools to help you monitor and optimize the environment. So whether that's from a security standpoint, whether it's from a cost standpoint, or a performance standpoint, you can go into Azure Security Center, you can go into the advisor, and you can see a lot of recommendations as to what Microsoft best practices would be in order to optimize the environment that you have built. So aside from the normal things like making sure your operating systems are in support and your applications are in support, you can look at those tools to optimize costs, performance, and security, following their best practices. Some things are going to apply to your business while other things don't. Um, but yeah, Microsoft makes it pretty easy to just go into the portal and look at some of those recommendations, um, and it'll give you links to you know how to implement them or the considerations to make for what its recommendation is.
Well, Spencer, you have opened up a wide, vast area of knowledge that hopefully that our attendees of this webinar are just suddenly realizing there's a lot that goes in with Azure Migrate, but it seems like there's a lot of great options to migrate once you're out there, and especially thank you for taking time out of your busy day as you are continually, taking care of our customers and helping them migrate and managing their infrastructure. So much appreciated.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for having me.
And have a great Thanksgiving too.
Thank you. You too.
Okay, we're going to shift gears here and we're actually going to go into the Azure Migrate demonstration. And we're going to take that knowledge that Spencer gave us and we're going to apply it to a discovery and assessment. And then you're going to see the tip of the iceberg of the migration. But to tell you the truth, migrations just take a long time, more time than this webinar will allow. But at least you're going to see the decision points that go into the assessment and discovery so that migration becomes second nature. Okay, well, here I am in my Hyper-V host environment. You can see the server name begins with 5440. That is my Hyper-V host. And within there, I have 3 servers that are running virtualized, server 1, 2, and 3. And the settings are pretty much the same across the board. I've got a real simple setup, 2 gigs of RAM, 2 processors, a hard drive, and so forth. Now, your environment is obviously going to look a lot different than this. This is a very simplified environment, but this is just an example of a multi-server environment running in Hyper-V. Now we're going to migrate this, but we have to plan for it first. So let's go to the Azure Migrate area within your Azure portal. So let's go ahead and click on Azure Migrate. And as you can see, there's a few migration goals to consider here. There's server databases and web apps, databases only, VDI, web apps, and DataBox. We're going to choose server, databases, and web apps. And we have to create a project first. So let's go ahead and do that. Now I have my subscription filled out there already. I'm going to create a new resource group, and I'm going to name it AZMIG, and we'll give it a project name. Let me try to find a creative name here. Azure Migrate it is. And we'll go ahead and select the geography. I'm based in the United States, so I want to select United States. Now there are some advanced options here. If you want to deploy it as a public endpoint or a private endpoint, you can choose those. We're going to select public endpoint in this example here. Okay, let's go ahead and create that. And now it is initializing the deployment. We'll wait until the deployment is completed. And now that it's completed, we have a lot of cool things we can do here. We've got a smorgasbord of things, if you will. We've got our project named Azure Migrate. We have assessment tools, and this is really where we're going to focus our attention predominantly in this demonstration, but we also have migration tools. By the way, these are free. So the assessment tool is going to be really effective in showing you how to discover the environment, how to build and review a business case, analyze dependencies, and just overall assess the servers that are migrating to Azure. So let's begin by discovering the environment. And in order to do that, we have to select the source environment that we're discovering, and that is Hyper-V. Now, there's two ways we can deploy this discovery. We can use an appliance, which is what we're going to do in this example, or we can import it using a CSV. Let's give the appliance a name. So this is going to be the appliance. It's going to be an actual server that gets inserted into my Hyper-V host. And I'm going to call it Azure MIG app. And it generates a key. And that key we're going to come back to later. Now we're going to go into the next step here and actually download the migration appliance. Now there's two ways you could do it. You can download the full VHD, or you can download the zip. I'm going to download the full VHD file, which in actuality, it is a zip file. It's 12 gigs, so it'll take some time to download that, but once it's there, we need to extract it. So I'm going to extract the file over into my Hyper-V area. So let me go ahead and browse for that location there. I typically keep my Hyper-V resources in a different drive under my Hyper-V folder here. So let's go ahead and select that folder. We can show extracted files when complete, and we'll just let that run. All right, I've got my Azure Migrate appliance. It has a VHD disk in there. It's pretty much set up. And our next step here is to import that machine into my Hyper-V host. So let's go ahead and do the import. We're going to select the folder where that Hyper-V resource is located. And we'll click on Next. And in this case, we're going to copy the virtual machine, which will create a new unique ID. So let's go ahead and proceed with that selection. And I'm going to store the virtual machine in a different folder than where the defaults are. So let's go ahead and I'll go through that process real quick to set up my Hyper-V destination location. I'll call that folder appliance. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'll set up the same location for the other resources that are required here. All right, so now we're going to select the machine where we're going to store and build up that machine there, and we'll click on Next. And now don't worry if you get an error here. It means that the image already contains a switch that is named in a certain way. So make sure you choose your external switch connection in your Hyper-V host. And we'll go ahead and finish, and it'll start that copying progression there, and it'll take some time for sure. So we'll just come back. And now that we can see that the Azure Migrate appliance is there, you can see it's there, it's in an off state, and all we have to do right now is turn it on. So let's go ahead and we'll go ahead and start it up. And as soon as it's started up, we'll connect right into it here. So again, just to review, what we did was we imported an Azure Virtual Machine appliance that's going to help us with the discovery of this. So as we start it up, what's happening is it has some scripts already that it's going to run at startup. So we do have to click on accept, and we do have to set a password just like we're doing an out-of-box experience on a server. But after that, the script is really going to run and help set up our appliance automatically. So let's go through that process. We're going to log in, as long as I get my password correct, and we'll go ahead and just let it run. And I'm speeding up this video just to show you the process of what happens with this appliance. So this is a great time while you're actually doing this to grab a cup of coffee, grab a slice of turkey, whatever the case might be, because this will take some time, probably up to about 5 to 10 minutes. But the next thing that you're going to see is a web page that will be brought up, just like this. And it's going to run its connection and it's going to start loading. And now we have to agree to the terms of use, and it's going to start the prerequisite step. So step one are prerequisites with checking connectivity to Azure, checking the time is in sync with Azure. And now, if you remember, we had a key that we have to copy over from our Azure portal and paste it into this section here. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll just copy it to the clipboard. We'll come back to our appliance and we're going to paste it right in there and click on that verify button. So the validation is happening. It's been verified. It's doing some auto updates. We want to definitely refresh it because at times there are updates to these appliances that happen. So let's go ahead and click on refresh. And again, it's going to set up those prerequisites. It's going to run through that process again, revalidate. And now it's going to say, hey, the appliance is successfully set up. Now what do we do? Well, we have to log into it using our Azure credentials. And along with that, there's a code that is provided just to validate credentials and trust in the Azure location and our identity. And I've got some MFA I'm going to complete. And now it says, hey, are you trying to log into Azure PowerShell? And the answer is, why, yes, I am. So go ahead and just close that tab there, and it's going to finish the appliance registration. And this will take up to 10 minutes to complete. So keep that in mind. And if you're a SpongeBob fan, 10 minutes later, we're going to see that the appliance has been successfully registered. I've logged in successfully using my Azure AD credential, and now on to step two. So step two involves managing credentials and discovery sources. So really, part one of this we've already done. I've provided my identity into the Hyper-V host. We can edit it if needed, but it's pretty much there. So I'm going to kind of skip over that, and I'm going to add a discovery source. Now that discovery source is actually my Hyper-V host itself. There's a few ways we could do it. If we have multiple Hyper-V servers, we can add things in bulk. In this case, I just have a single Hyper-V host. I'm going to add the IP address of that Hyper-V host right in here. We're going to select that friendly name and have it validate. Now, this step three, this last step, is just optional. Now, if we have some other things we're trying to deploy and map credentials like to databases or Active Directory domains or so forth, this is where we might want to focus some attention, but in this case, we don't need to. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to actually start that discovery process right now. All right, the discovery has been successfully initiated, and now we can head on over to the Azure portal to see the results. So let's refresh the page here under that Azure Migrate Discovery and Assessment, and pretty soon we're going to see that there's going to be some additional quantities of Windows servers or what have you, or Linux or other servers that are discovered. And as you can see, I've got 4 of them right there. And when we look at it a little bit closer, we can look into the discovered servers here. So let me click on that number 4 there. And as you can see, my server 1, 2, and 3 are included, but it also discovered the migration appliance itself. So we don't really need to count on that one, but at least it was successful at discovering the environment on the Hyper-V host. And as you can see, there's memory and storage and operating system information available here. So at this point, we're going to actually run the assessment. So we can assess VM, SQL, web apps, and so forth. In this case, I'm assessing my Azure VM capability of migrating, and we'll go ahead and we're going to select servers discovered from the appliance. And there's a few other things we want to consider here. So we want to make sure that the target location of our choice is selected. This is very much like running the Azure calculator. What type of storage do we want? And if you ever get stuck on any of these areas, you could always hover over the informational button there, and it gives you some good information. For this, I'm going to choose Premium Managed Disks for my environment. I kind of wanted to run, like a lean, clean fighting machine there. And as far as that goes, we're going to do the 3 years reserved. Sizing criteria, we could do, hey, why not performance-based? I kind of want it to be more of a performance machine. And for performance history, we can look at some information there. Don't really need to change anything here. We can also look at that percentile utilization. And really now comes the fun part. Let's select the type of machines that we want to deploy. And as you can see, there's a lot of them. I am very much used to and accustomed to the DSV3 series. So I'm going to go ahead and select that. And that comfort factor gives you a little bit of information there. I'm really not going to go into the changes there, but if you want to adjust any of those changes, you can and see what they mean. For the subscription, there's pay as you go. It might be different for you. You might have some enterprise or some other things going on there. And we'll go ahead and I'm already going to say I have a Windows Server license available, which I do. And you know what? I'm not going to deploy Defender as part of this. So let me select no to this. And at this point, we'll save the assessment configuration and we'll go on to the next section here. The next section, we have to name the assessment. So let's give that a fancy name called Assess My Server Migration. And we'll go ahead and create a new group for this. I'll call it Assess My Servers Group. Forgive the spelling mistake there. And we're going to select the servers that I want to evaluate in this migration. So we'll go ahead and proceed with creating that assessment, letting that run. And upon a successful creation and validation of the assessment, we're going to see a few things here. We're going to see the servers again, and then we're also going to be able to go back to the servers, databases, and web apps. I'm going to refresh it. And at this point, I'm going to go into the group that I just created. Now you can see I have a couple groups that I've created in the past. The most recent one I created was this Assess My Servers group, the one that is GRUP. And as you can see, the servers show up there. And what's really nice about this is that you can look at dependencies. You can also look at the memory, the disks, the storage, the operating system. You can see when that support ends, the life cycle of it. So that's a really nice thing to also know about is, hey, when is my support ending on these operating systems? And at this point, we can view the assessments. And the assessment is going to give you some very nice information in terms of what it's going to take to migrate and how much it's going to cost in the long run. So you can see the Azure readiness factors, monthly cost estimate of those 3 servers, the storage monthly cost estimate. And as you can see, there are some warnings here. So it's good to wait perhaps a day or so to let the assessment kind of, cook, if you will, and making sure that it's as accurate as possible because things tend to change after, Azure kind of evaluates its thing. So what we're going to do is, right now, to me, it looks like this is a good way to proceed. The supportability looks there. It looks good there, I should say. And it looks like I've got some extended support options I can do. And if I wanted to consider Azure Hybrid Benefit, I can see what potential savings I might have from that. So a lot of good information to glean from this Azure assessment and the discovery, and we can export it. So if we want to show a C-level executive what this is going to cost, we can go ahead and export that into a spreadsheet. And let's open up that spreadsheet just to have a glance at what the type of information we're getting from this. So you can see a nice summary of the number of machines that have been assessed, what that monthly cost estimate would be, what the compute, the storage, if there's any security or the disk costs or anything like that, it's all there right in front of you. The graphical interfaces here are also very helpful. I know that a lot of my bosses like to see graphs and colors, so it does produce a really nice report. And all of the raw data is also in the tabs that precede that. So assessed machines, assessed disks, assessment properties in total. So as we go through the information here, you can see there's a lot of good information, a lot of good tables and information collection here. And really, we're ready for the next step, which is to really migrate the servers at this point. So if it looks good from a cost analysis standpoint, if the machines are technically good to go, if overall the project is good to go, then we proceed to the next step. But these are really helpful tools in understanding the cost factors and the performance that you're going to get and the ROI really over time, what you would be getting out of this. All right. So hopefully this was helpful in showing you what that assessment looks like. And I did want to go back into the Azure portal to take a look at some of these areas. So really the next step in this whole process is to run the migration and modernization process. And as you can see, there's a few steps involved here. We have discover, replicate, migrate, and then look at the overview. Now, we start with discovery, just like we did in the assessment phase. It really kind of runs the same thing. It just does a rediscovery because sometimes there's a lot of time in between the assessment and the time that we have to replicate. There are tools here to download in order to get them onto the Hyper-V server. in order for that replication to begin. And this is where we do the replication choices. We're going to select servers or virtual machines, and we're going to select Azure VM as the destination. And as we replicate, you can see it will go through virtual machines, target settings, and such. Now, if you need something that requires more complexity in terms of migration tools, Carbonite, wow, that's been a name out there for a long time, Corent Tech, Rackware, and Zerto, these are all top-notch migration tools that can provide more fidelity into the migration if it's needed on top of the Azure Migrate tool. So that's pretty much it. I mean, if we really went through the whole migration, it would definitely take much longer than would allow in our webinar. But I encourage you to explore that section of it, to actually run the migrations in a lab environment if you have, and see for yourself. Hopefully this demonstration showed you how easy and thorough it was to migrate servers to Azure. There's a lot of assessment that goes into it, right? And in terms of calculating the price and everything and seeing the machines that you'll be getting gives a good view of what you are getting. Now, in terms of costs, Azure has probably the most flexible costs, whereas compared to a traditional VM environment, these are generally fixed costs. Hybrid solutions. Azure makes it much easier to move workloads from your data center to Azure servers and back, whereas in traditional VMs, you're stuck on those local servers. In terms of security, and by the way, this is huge, Azure offers 24-hour monitored physical security, intrusion prevention, and ISO certified data centers, whereas in a traditional VM infrastructure, most companies can't even come close to what Microsoft offers for security. For maintenance, Azure provides automatic OS patching, and this is great if you want Microsoft to do that. Now, you do have the option to have that responsibility, but keep in mind, Azure is built on load balancing and resiliency, and that's going to help keep your business continuity up and running. Traditional VMs, on the other hand, you've got to upgrade and maintain both hardware and software for the servers, and this is going to cause disruption, perhaps, in the environment. As far as Azure being open, I mean, it's open to almost any language, framework, or tools to build applications. But with VM, you're pretty much limited to the language that's on the servers or any kind of virtualization solution. As far as the speed, I mean, for provisioning resources in minutes, that says a lot. And also having access to almost unlimited servers and storage is pretty huge. Whereas in traditional VMs, hey, it might take weeks to order, rack, and provision new servers or storage when that new compute power is needed. In licensing, Azure provides Windows, Linux, SQL, Oracle licensing, and beyond. Whereas the purchasing licensing is really a separate transaction when it comes to traditional VMs. Frequently, you're committed to a longer-term agreement, and frequently, the OSs aren't updated as often as they should. Well, I'd like to round out this webinar by saying thanks for attending. I really appreciate everyone sticking around. And as we're approaching the holidays and into the new year, we like to always reflect on who we are, why we do IT, and where we're going. We're obsessed humans. We love to make people's lives better through technology, and we're always striving to create positive social impacts wherever possible. Our awards and certifications really make us credible in the industry, and we are your solutions partner. We can provide you any kind of readiness. We can be your cloud solutions provider for any kind of licensing, data center optimization. Hey, if you want to see a customer immersion experience, we have plenty of those. So look out for those, and you are welcome to join. We work in several areas as well in terms of government, education, nonprofit, as well as commercial. And we strive to sustain that Microsoft Tech for Social Impact Service Provider status. Well, I hope you all have a very happy Thanksgiving. In the couple minutes left, I am open to answering any questions, but otherwise, have a great rest of your day.